Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast, IT Coach for Small Business Leaders. I'm your podcast co-host, Josh Davis, the Vice President of Marketing at InfoSystems. And with me today, as always, is our virtual CIO, Aaron Swan, the IT Coach for Small Business Leaders.
Good morning, Josh.
Good morning. And I get the privilege of introducing our topic today.
Yeah.
So this is a good one. I think people are going to connect right away because this is something that at least once every, 3 to 5 years, most people probably deal with, and that is how to choose a computer. When you need a new personal computer, PC, how do you go about choosing what you want? I mean, that seems like such a simple thing, but let's be honest, there's millions of choices out there, and you go to these sites like Amazon and Best Buy and major retailers, and like the choices are endless. You can order direct from the manufacturer at Dell and HP and all of this stuff. So how do you choose a computer?
Yeah, so I would respond to that first by saying, how do you choose a car? What kind of car should I buy?
I think the answer to that is always Ferrari.
Yeah, it very well may be, if you got the budget, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, but let's take that question seriously for a moment. What do you need to do with that vehicle? Do you need to transport 7 people to a vacation destination, in comfort? Probably Ferrari's not going to be your... That's probably not going to work.
The
right?
answer is not Ferrari in that scenario.
So, but if it's transport 2 people really fast and in style, then maybe so.
Boom.
Yeah, that's your go-to. The possibility. What if it's one person and you need to just do it as green as possible? You're concerned about the environment. What's your answer there? And I don't know what the answer to that is because I'm not a car guy. Okay, there you go, Tesla.
Or a Prius. That's the de facto green car out there, right?
But the point is, there's not a one-size-fits-all in cars, right? It depends on what you're trying to get to. Same thing is true with PC. There's not a one-size-fits-all. That's why there's all those different types out there. So the first question you need to ask yourself is, what are you trying to do with it? And so when someone comes and asks me, and by the way, I'm glad we're doing this podcast because I think I'm just going to use this as reference points when my friends can come and say, hey, what kind of computers can you buy? I'm just going to send them to this link and say, go watch this podcast.
Yeah, hey, you know what? I know where there's an answer to that question.
Yeah,
Let me text it to you.
Right. So save us all some time. So we are going to talk today, and we're not going to get into the whole PC Mac debate.
Oh, man.
So not today. So those of you who've watched our podcast before have seen a MacBook Air sitting in front of me, and I think a PC sitting in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
I do use a MacBook in my business use here at InfoSystems, but I should say I have Windows virtualized on it, so I have both OSs there. And that's for a very deliberate reason. It's because I have customers that have both, and it makes it easier for me to be able to interface with both systems and just keep up with it. So
yeah,
I'm not going to weigh in on that debate today.
So maybe a future episode would be Mac versus PC and how they are used in the business world. So if anybody out there actually wants to hear that topic, send it in as a question.
Yeah.
Because then we'll know you want to talk about it, and we'll talk about it.
There you go. So for today, though, we're just going to stay in the PC world because no matter what your feelings are, the truth is that's the dominant. In most businesses, we see a lot more PCs than we do Mac.
Yeah.
So we're going to assume PC. We're going to assume running Windows for this conversation today. So, and because this podcast is designed to cater to a business computing.
Yep.
Okay. So we may touch a little bit on personal computing, but this is about business. So
we'll be back with the IT Coach for Small Business Leaders podcast after we pause for this special message. I'm Josh Davis, VP of Marketing at InfoSystems. You may have seen me co-hosting episodes of our podcast, IT Coach for Small Business Leaders. Did you know that you can book a personal IT strategy session with Aaron Swan, host of this podcast? We created this podcast to be a valuable resource for small business leaders in our community, but we wanted to take it one step further. You can book a free meeting with Aaron Swan to to review your IT strategy and help you build a plan that will lead to IT success. Just visit our website at www.infosystems.biz, follow the link to book your IT strategy session, and you'll be able to work directly with Aaron to build your IT strategy. Now back to the podcast.
Let's talk about, for each of these categories, we're going to just talk about an average business class PC. You know, what do you see most of the time? So let's start with processor. So in the processor world, Intel is the kind of the king. There's some other manufacturers out there, AMD, for example. Intel kind of rules the roost on processors. So
Intel and AMD definitely the top two dominant
Absolutely.
players in the market.
Absolutely. So Intel, they name their processors. They have really 4 out there now. They have the i3, i5, i7, and i9 line of processors. So right away, that seems kind of like secret code on what kind of processors should I buy.
Yeah, and so the ones of the past were what? Pentium.
Right.
And there was another one that was really kind of the lower level of Pentium. If you have those, it's time to replace your PC.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So i3, i5, i7, i9, those are the current names of the processors out there. For the average business class PC, and so by average I mean we're talking middle of the road. This is someone who's using Office applications. They've probably got 2 or 3 web pages open. They may have Outlook for their email. They may have Word and Excel open. So they've got several tasks open, but they're not necessarily a power user. They're just the average user. So I would say for those kind of users, and we find that most people fit into this category, an i5 processor is a good fit in most cases.
Yep.
If for a lower end, if it's someone all they use is the internet pages and then they're pretty low end, or maybe a kiosk machine that just does 1 or 2 functions, you might step down to an i3, save a little money there. If you've got power users, people that are maybe working with CAD systems, or doing a whole lot more open windows at the same time, you might step up to an i7, possibly even an i9 if you're really heavily into things. In the gaming world, more on the home side, probably are looking at an i7 or i9 to be able to drive those heavier graphic loads.
And the processor is mainly going to impact the speed in which things happen, right?
Right. Well, it's one factor in the overall speed of the PC, and we'll talk about some other things that impact speed. But yeah, the processor is essentially the brain. That's what's actually doing the computing, and so yeah, it's controlling that overall picture.
Yeah. So if you're using a lot of applications like accounting systems and inventory management and stuff like that, you probably need a beefy processor.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So second category then is RAM or memory. All right. So again, we'll talk about that average business class PC. We have found that usually about 8 gig of RAM is about the right amount for most business users that have a few applications open. Again, if it's a lower end PC, you might be able to get away with 4 gig. Honestly, I don't know that I would bother. The money saving just isn't that great. I really would get at least 8 gig of RAM, just because you're not going to save that much money by stepping down.
So like the i5 processor and 8 gig of RAM would really be kind of a standard business PC for a light user.
Yeah.
And it's pretty rare that you would go below that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
The reverse is not necessarily true, though. I'm starting to see 16 gig become a whole lot more common, especially among the power user set, or if they have just a lot of applications open. I've got several customers. You go and look at their browser window, and they have 20 tabs open.
Yeah, we might need to do a whole separate episode talking about people who can't close browser tabs. Because I've seen people with like 50-something browser tabs.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you've got a problem. We need to address it. Okay, so anyway.
Yeah, and every one of those tabs does eat up system resources on the machine. So if you're gonna be like that, then you may need to throw some more RAM at that. And possibly even more, again, if you're getting into CAD and other systems, or gaming, you might need even more RAM than that. But 16 gig goes quite a long ways.
Yeah. Okay.
So let's talk about disk then. So the storage on the PC. So there's a couple of factors that go into this. One is capacity. How much do I need to store? The other one is speed. How fast is that storage?
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about just the idea of capacity versus speed, because there can be kind of a trade-off there. There's two predominant technologies in disk. One is just the old traditional spinning disk. It's literally a spinning platters that hard drive is operating off of. And then there's the newer style, which are solid state. There's no moving parts. It's literally using memory that can store long term even without power, and it's a lot faster. So the trade-off though is for the dollar, SSD or solid state storage is more expensive, so you don't get as much capacity for your buck.
Yeah, and for SSD, a lot of times, am I correct? A lot of times that's just referred to as flash storage. People just kind of interchangeably say SSD or flash, but it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah. From a technical perspective, they're not. But,
Right.
But it is a misnomer, and two people do use that terms interchangeably that way.
Yeah, okay. So I assume there could be a solid state drive that is not flash,
Yeah.
but that's not really the terminology.
That's a whole
that
other
people
topic,
use.
right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to capacity, I would make the argument that capacity on your personal PC doesn't need to be that big. Why? Well, I would say, especially in a business setting, you really shouldn't be storing your data on your personal PC. It should be stored up on a server somewhere or a cloud resource or something like that, where it's getting backed up and it's shareable with, in a network environment with the other users for collaboration and that sort of thing. So, in my opinion, capacity is not all that important. You probably need a good, 256 gig is a good solid number. That fits nicely into where most solid state drives are. So I'm a big fan of putting solid state drives in PCs because they are one of the ways that you can see a huge speed increase, and perceived speed and real speed. It just makes the machine seem so much snappier. Boot up times.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed the impact on boot up when I've used an SSD powered laptop versus a hard disk powered laptop.
Yeah, so just the boot up time, just the speed at which applications load, it makes a really big difference. So my recommendation in most cases, business class, is forego the larger spinning disk, get a nice solid state drive, and I think you'll see I think you'll make your users all a lot happier.
Yeah, and let's be honest, one of the most frustrating things about using a computer is boot up time. Nobody wants to open their computer and then stand there for 5 minutes while the little circle spins saying getting started or whatever. You're like, oh, come on, I just want to work.
So a couple other just factors on this is OS. We made the assumption for this podcast today that we're talking about Windows OS. The distinction, though, is make sure that if you're doing this in a business environment, get the latest, right? So it's Windows 10 right now, but get the Pro Edition.
Yeah.
Don't buy the Home Edition. And that makes a difference when you're trying to connect into business resources.
Yeah. Back to the topic of SSD and hard drive, am I correct in also thinking that there is a much lower likelihood of failure for an SSD versus a hard drive? That's something that I've heard is like a hard drive, a spinning disk, has mechanical parts that can break, especially like if you bump or drop the machine versus an SSD, which doesn't have the mechanical parts.
It is absolutely true because when you take away moving parts, there's less to go wrong. So yeah, especially for the scenarios that you describe when you're doing bumps and things like that. Now I will say, from a long-term perspective, there are some concerns about solid-state drives, but those really play more into long-term storage for servers and things like that. So for the average PC, it's the way to go.
Yeah, and in a storage network at a place of business, those devices are not getting moved and shuffled around. They're bolted into a rack.
Right.
and very little can go wrong there. So
Absolutely. The last factors, again, we'll talk about, and if we're going back to our car analogy, these are the things that aren't, we've been talking about the engine of the car, really. Other things that come into play, we might, these are like the cup holders and the stereos and things like that. So if you're into gaming, or again, if you're into high-end CAD, you may need to look at custom graphics cards. The average business doesn't need that. They can just operate on what the PC comes with, to operate MS Office and things like that. So one thing you should care about, though, is the number of monitors output. So making sure that the PC does have enough outputs for that, and the proper type. It's a fairly common thing that businesses replace PCs, but they may keep the same monitors.
right.
And sometimes those monitors are getting a little long in the tooth, and they may have an older interface on them. They work okay, but the interface, so you may be having to get into adapters and things like that. So just make sure you're paying attention, you're getting the right number of outputs and the right type.
Yeah, and a lot of, not only monitors, but a lot of people probably use those ports for other types of peripheral devices,
Right.
like a wireless mouse and keyboard, or a plug-in flash drive that they may use to take files elsewhere. There's a lot of different things. So, yeah, this is the case, I think, with a lot of the electronics manufacturers. You'll see this a lot of times with TVs that are part of like Black Friday offers and stuff. They'll promote them as having the same type of resolution specs as the higher priced TVs, but
Right.
what they do is cut back on all of the ports on there to save cost, and so you'll end up with a TV that instead of having 4 or 5 HDMI plugins, it only has 2.
Right.
And then you get into a situation where you might be stuck. You can't use that Amazon Fire TV stick that you wanted to use because there's no plugins left. Same with a computer. If you buy a computer and skimp on the ports, you may end up in a situation where, oh no, that wireless mouse and keyboard I just bought, I don't have anywhere to plug it in because there's not an open USB.
So it's getting less common, but you do still see it out there. In addition to skimping on the number, they skimp on the type too. So make sure you're getting some USB 3.0 ports in there, because those are the higher speed ones. But yeah, making sure you've got enough ports. Form factor comes into it. So, how big is the PC? Do you need something really small, or do you have room for it to spread out a little bit? Talk about the warranty. So there's these other factors that play into the whole decision.
Yeah, and another thing to think about, this conversation is rapidly expanding into a lot of other things beyond just the processor and drive type and everything, but a lot of models will have things like backlit keyboards. People, if you're working in low light situations, you may want to have a backlit keyboard so that you can see the keypad, if you're on an airplane or something like that. And some people need the number keypad on their laptop because they use the 10 key keypad a lot. That's also something you can address with a peripheral, but people might not want to do that.
Well, and it's particularly true if we're talking about, a lot of what I thought today was just around business PCs, which is a lot of times those are desktops, right? But but not always. A lot of these are laptops and portables, and so yeah, that absolutely plays into it, because if it's not built in, you're going to have to carry something else in that bag, and you probably don't want to do that. So yeah, having the backlit keyboard, the overall form factor, and so what's important to you in a laptop, is it more about power, or is it more about portability and lightness and type of thing? Now, we'll say as technology has gotten better, you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. You can get some pretty powerful machines that are still lightweight.
Yep.
But there's still somewhat of a trade-off there.
So here's a question. Let me throw you a little bit of a curveball. What factors come into play when a business is choosing to purchase a new PC in deciding should they get a laptop versus a desktop machine?
Sure. So I think if there's a need for the person to be able to take that computer out and move it around, then you probably do want to consider the laptop. Why wouldn't you always do that? It's cost, right? So the desktop equivalent machine with the same capability is going to be cheaper in the desktop than it will be in a laptop. So
Gotcha. So that, the main consideration there would be save cost by purchasing desktop computers. But if cost isn't an issue, you've talked about these companies that just have the bags of cash sitting around. That, for those companies, if cost is not an issue, then just buy all laptops, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because we all have bags of cash stocked away in the.
Well, when you get into the laptop world now, you've got to start talking about, well, how do I interface that with the desk? Because people don't like to just. A lot of people don't like to just look at that tiny monitor. They want those big monitors up there. And in a laptop world, you need some way so that every time you come in and out, you're not having to sit there and hook up multiple connectors. So now we're talking about docking stations and things like that. And
cost goes up.
Cost goes up, right? So think through what the use case for the PC is.
Yep, good stuff. So lots of good information there. I assume this can be a resource that lives on for a while. This discussion is now recorded, will be out there on the interwebs. And so if you listeners have friends who ask you questions about, God, I don't know what kind of PC I should buy, just point them to our podcast. We're here for you. We got your back.
Of course, what will happen now that we've recorded this is inevitably Intel will replace the whole processor line tomorrow. So
new announcement. PCs are no longer powered by processors and storage drives.
Right.
There's a new technology.
It will change.
Yep. But hey, at least we'll get a couple of days of play out of this podcast. Yeah. So anyway, thanks for tuning in today. We love talking with you. As always, if you have questions or topics that you would like us to discuss on the podcast, please reach out and let us know. You can reach us on our LinkedIn or Facebook page. You can submit a web form on our website, or hey, go the old-fashioned route and place a phone call. We'll answer. We'll pick up. We love being able to talk about topics that you care about, and the way we're going to know what you care about is if you submit a question. So we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Until next time.
Thanks, Josh.